When you are trying to do something like, let's just go find, someone of color to put into this situation, you're not thinking about what challenges they would face or even what would be attractive to them to make them want to come sit in your presumably oppressive and exclusive environment. Because if you're looking for that kind of tokenism, it's because you have no foundation of belonging and inclusion, or you would have never asked something so stupid. But when you start to look at inclusion and belonging and the way everyone in the company can prosper and thrive, then you know that you have inclusion and you have belonging. And that actually leads to real diversity that's sustainable and that makes a difference in your company's performance.
Hi, I'm Nelly. On today's episode, we talk to Lorraine Vargas Townsend. She is the Chief People Guru at AIHR. As a Latina, queer, and high school dropout, things have not always been easy for Lorraine, to say the least. As a result, though, she's become this super driven woman that brings a passion into her everyday work that I've rarely come across. Our conversation touches on things like building an inclusive workplace, tokenism, unfair pay, and what does it feel like to be the only minority person in a boardroom meeting. Before we jump in though, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video. Without further ado, here's our conversation. Welcome to another episode of All About HR. Lorraine, of course, welcome to this very first episode. I am super happy to have you as our first guest. And I think what we could start with is I recently saw that someone described their chief people guru, that was you, as the bomb. So I was actually wondering, what can you tell us about that description?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny because I never go to Glassdoor looking for a compliment or expecting to see something nice. And my CEO actually sent me that comment and showed me that someone had said that. And I don't know, I just was so happy and so surprised. It was such a good way to start my day.
Perhaps you can say a little bit about a cloud guru for the people that don't know the company yet.
Yeah, a cloud guru is a company that teaches the world to cloud. So basically, we help people gain new technical skills, especially cloud-based certifications, through companies like Amazon and Microsoft Azure or Google. So basically, we give you additional training to help you have even more opportunity in the tech space to earn better money and get better jobs.
It must be amazing to be working in a company where what the company does is super aligned with what you actually also want to do, of course, in the HR department.
Right. And what I want to do, like as a calling, I don't think there's a lot of people who have the opportunity to wake up every day and do the work that they feel is what they were put on the planet to do. And to work for a company who is aligned to that same kind of calling, it's something pretty spectacular when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Lorraine, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the culture at a Cloud Guru as well, because I saw that you mentioned it somewhere as basically the company's secret sauce. So I was wondering if you could tell us something about the culture at a Cloud Guru and perhaps what its key pillars are in your view.
We have a really special culture at a Cloud Guru, and one that's really based in treating people like you care about them. On your first day at a Cloud Guru, when you start, someone delivers breakfast to your door, and your first
Oh.
meeting is having breakfast with someone, with your new hire buddy. And it sounds so simple and so like almost silly, but in the um, totally remote world that COVID has forced us into, doing like little small touches like that actually bring people together to make a deeper connection. I think that's like evidence of our culture. And we do have like pillars that we talk about. We talk about hiring people who are humble or people who want to learn all the things. Obviously, we're a learning company, so the learning orientation is very high in our organization. But more than like the kind of marketing words, I like to point to the things that I see as evidence. We have a healthy mix of diversity in our organization. So even on the executive team, we're half men, half women. We have people of color, we have gay people. Like it's really interesting. Um, to see how lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds can work together, can inspire each other to innovate and collaborate more. And it really starts with our CEO and with our executive team. I think because they started there and they've built this culture on that team, that's what's filtered down into the organization. And you see that kind of people being more vulnerable, people making deeper connections really at every level. And I think that's the foundation of who we are.
Yeah, beautiful. And this is also something that I would love to touch on a little bit later in our conversation today, because I know this is something that you are passionate about, of course, DEI. And I know that you have a lot of super interesting things to say about that. Perhaps a bit of a more general question to start with when it comes to DEI. Maybe it's interesting to see what you are seeing that companies are getting right, or what is going pretty well, if anything, and what keeps going wrong when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that this is very different from one country to another and from one company to
Yeah.
another, but maybe you can share some of your experiences with that.
I think diversity is an outcome. Diversity is a fact, and everyone can hire all different kinds of people, and at a moment in time, you might have a really good number or representation that you can put on a graph to say like we're a diverse company. But what you could potentially get wrong is if you treat everyone like shit inside the company, then you can have diversity at a moment in time, but as you go forward, you have higher turnover for people of color, you have higher turnover for women. And I had a friend who she and I had like a really a lot of deep conversation about stuff like this, because she worked for a company that had great diversity on paper. They were one of these tech companies who would publish a report every year and put out like, here's our diversity statistics. But when you dug a little bit deeper into that company, women at certain levels stopped getting promoted. And they stopped getting promoted because they stopped accepting promotions, because at a certain level and above in the company, women were treated very poorly. And in fact, like women would start on the executive team and then just vanish overnight. And because I was working so close to that person, we had a lot of conversations to brainstorm it and try to figure out like what is actually the root cause. And she told me a story of being like in the executive, boardroom, of conversations happening that are really impacting outcomes that were happening in the HR department. And the executive team, the men on the team didn't like what she was pushing on, so they literally got up and went into the bathroom to finish the conversation where she couldn't follow them. And it sounds like an old-timey story, like something that would have happened during Mad Men,
Yeah.
where you literally get up and go make the decision in the place where the woman can't go. But that was the kind of culture that it was. And so while they might have had good statistics, they had actually horrible outcomes inside their company. And so I think looking at diversity is just a snapshot. But when you start to look at inclusion and belonging and the way everyone in the company can prosper and thrive, and you start to look at how do you pay all different kinds of people at every level, what is the mix of people that you have at every different leadership level, are all of the voices in the room equally heard and equally celebrated, and can every single person contribute their own unique gift in a way that feels safe? Then you know that you have inclusion and you have belonging, and that actually leads to real diversity that's sustainable and that makes a difference in your company's performance.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And by the way, I love the little reference to Mad Men, because indeed, you would think of that series when you hear the story that you were telling. It's unbelievable. I wanted to continue, I think, here about unfair pay, because I saw. I mean, I had a thorough look, of course, at all the things that you shared on your LinkedIn feed, and there are many super interesting things. So I would definitely encourage everyone who's watching this or listening to follow Lorraine on LinkedIn and to see what she's sharing. But so one of the things you shared there was an article, I think, on fastcompany.com, and this was related to unfair pay. And you said that it's time to throw out antiquated policies. Well, first of all, perhaps you can talk about these antiquated policies, maybe one or two that you're referring to here, and then how do you intend to throw them out?
Sure. Look, equal pay, it's really personal to me, because I spent a lot of my career making half of what my male counterparts made, or really 48%. And it's really interesting when a company decides to do something like that to an HR person, because we have access to the data, right? Like, we can see what other people are making, we know what other people's backgrounds are. And this was a company that I loved. It's a company that I grew up in. It's one who's very committed to gender equality now. But when I was working there, it was just a bit still old fashioned, a bit paternalistic, and they were kind of in uh, a growth or evolution when it came to how they treated women. And so I spent 10 years there, and I had a nice career. Right, like I started out as like kind of a peon. I was like an HR representative, and I quickly had an opportunity to move to France to become an expat, to lead executive development. I started up strategic workforce planning for them. I traveled all around the world. Like, my career really accelerated because of this company. But still, when I would go back to my boss, or go back to, people who were leading the rewards team, and I would complain about my pay, they would do this, like, really, this thing that really just makes me angry, which is like, yeah, we see your point. We see and we value you. So here's a 15% increase. Congratulations. Aren't you so happy? And when you know that you're only being paid half of what your colleagues make, even though 15% is a generous increase by corporate standards and by HR standards, it's still just horrible, and it doesn't feel good. And I had people who I really believed in, and people who I really followed and was inspired by, but they would tell me things like, Lorraine, money isn't everything. And I just remember going like, "But you've gotta be kidding. It's not fair, and the company is investing in me so much. Why would you let me leave over, something like money? Because I know the company values me, and I also, like, really love this company." So it's just such a weird, it's a very personal scar, and it's just such a weird, part of how corporations, and particularly HR departments, have institutionalized um, disparity between people, right? Like, I think it was the first personal experience that I had where I went like, oh my God, the job that I do, like the profession that I've chosen, is really complicit in, doing things that are actually bad for people. So it's personal. And so when I look at pay equity inside the companies where I've been, um, I really do say, like, let's look at what the market pays for that job, because this person in front of us who we value and who we think is spectacular, they can literally go outside and get an offer for what the market demands. And if someone doesn't do that, you have to quit. And I just think that's also been a big message for me when I'm talking to other women, when I'm talking to other minorities who feel like they have a pay discrepancy. At some point, it's not about your personal power anymore. It's about political power, positional power. So if positional power comes into play, and the answer is just a cut and dry, this is our policy, this is what we will do. Well, now it's on you to make the choices that you have to make to take care of yourself, to earn the right kind of money that sustains your family and sustains the lifestyle that you want. You have to be brave enough to make that decision, and you have to do it. Like, that's what you have to do for yourself as a person.
Yeah, I mean that was yeah. Thank you for sharing that story with us, Lorraine. First of all, however, I think that is also not necessarily easily done. So I mean, you're of course the chief people guru at a cloud guru, so you are actually in a position to contribute to making a difference. But what would you say to HR professionals working in companies where they find themselves trying to fight for this but without results? How do you go about this? Perhaps you can give a bit of advice on that.
I guess I have two pieces of advice. I would say, one, stop making talking about money taboo. I think, people should openly talk about money. Talk about what you earn. Talk about the stock options you got or you didn't get. Like, and I think that's actually one way that allies, can help everyone else understand, what's fair and what's market. So I think just being really open and sharing with your friends, with your colleagues, and it takes someone doing it first to make it less taboo. And I know it's very unpopular for HR people, but a lot of things that I will say are unpopular for HR people.
Which is why we love having you as well, Lorraine.
Thank you. Thank you. But the other thing is always be interviewing. Like, look, this is not the 1950s or the 1980s. It is normal now to change jobs every 18 months or, even every year. So when you get a recruiter call, when you get, an opportunity to interview, don't ever stop doing that. I don't care how much you love your job. Like, it's a bit about networking, it's a bit about practicing having those conversations. You don't want to do something dumb. Like, if you don't actually intend to change jobs, don't go all the way to the final interview and then back out. But if you want to stay sharp, if you want to always know what you're worth, and by the way, if you want to always be able to talk about what you're contributing, practice interviewing. So interviewing will also help you at your performance review time. It'll help you when you're giving presentations. If you start to really hone in on, like, what is my brand? What do I contribute? What am I putting out into the world? Things start just coming your way. And I'll tell you what, I think 2021 is going to be the year of the job change. This is going to be the year where people were hesitant last year to change. This is the year that people are hiring. This is the year that talent is hot. This is a great time to practice interviewing.
Thank you so much. I think these are two fantastic pieces of advice, and these are the skills that are always going to be very useful for you within the company. So I really love those two examples. Thank you so much. I'd like to talk about something else, and that is tokenism for a moment. I know that you also, we talked about this as well when we were preparing for today's conversation, of course. So there is an example that we came across actually quite recently, and I'll share it with you, and then I'm super curious to hear your thoughts on it. And the example came from a lady that is giving coaching to companies, also to C-level people within companies, and so she was having a really great conversation with that company, and then by the end of the conversation they said something along the lines of, okay, really great, great presentation, you are obviously a woman, but for diversity reasons we would really like if you have like a black male as a coach within your company. So she was very offended by that, and she told them, and by the way, she also told them that she was going to share that story on social. But we were thinking about that here at AIHR when we were preparing for this conversation, and we were like, okay, this is definitely something that's interesting to talk to you about as well, because I'm not saying that that's the case in the example I just gave to you, but sometimes even well-meaning companies, they may be unintentionally guilty of tokenism. So, how can they avoid that? What are your thoughts on that, first of all?
I think this story is from Tara, not the HR lady.
Yes, exactly. You saw it as well. Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, I loved reading her stuff, and I'll tell you why, because she and I have something in common. That is that when people look at us, they make assumptions. When people look at me, they think, oh, that's a white HR lady in her 40s, and so I think I know who she is, right? Like, she's going to be the one who's telling us to follow the rules, or she's going to be the one who's really protecting the company. And they kind of put me in a box, and they don't realize that, I'm a first generation American. My family is Colombian. I'm a lesbian. They probably really think that I'm straight. They, don't realize that I'm a high school dropout. And so probably my perspective is really different than they assume it will be. And it's the same for Tara. She presents a lot like I do, but she's also a woman of color. She's also a woman who has gone through big life events and who is trying to change the face of HR. And so by saying something like that, like, oh, we really wish you had a black man, it's just really bizarre. And it shows you the bias that the person who's talking to you has built in to themselves, and it shows you the assumptions that they're making about you in front of them, without them even asking any questions or being curious or learning about who you are or why you're in this work, and it's completely offensive. So I think that I really related to her post a lot when I read it. But the other thing is, like, when you are trying to do something like, let's just go find a black woman for this position, or let's just go find, someone of color to put into this situation, you're not even thinking about what they might go through. You're not thinking about what challenges they would face, or even what would be attractive to them to make them want to come sit in your presumably oppressive and exclusive environment. Because if you're looking for that kind of tokenism, it's because you have no foundation of belonging and inclusion, or you would have never asked something so stupid, right? Like, and so when you think about what happens to people when they're the only one in the room, it's really difficult. I can say it as, you know being the only person in the room in the executive team. Let's take the high school dropout point of view, where I worked at a company where everyone went to Harvard. Everyone in the executive team went to Harvard. I'm in Boston. If you are walking outside in my neighborhood, if you just throw a rock, you'll definitely hit someone who went to Harvard. Um, and so it's a really interesting, you know, dichotomy to be like in a situation like this, coming from my background and sharing, space with this kind of an audience. And what happens when you're at that table is that you are under a microscope. Like, when you're the only woman in the room, everyone's watching your facial expression. Everybody's watching how you respond to stuff, and they're waiting to judge it. When you're the only black person in the room, there's actually a phrase that's called code switching, and it's what minorities, or what people who don't look like the majority, have to do in order to assimilate to the situation where the majority is. So that's like where you hear stories of, like, people of color not feeling like they're allowed to be angry or to contradict things, because there's this stereotype of, like, the scary black guy. And they need to make sure that they don't seem dangerous when they're in a situation at work, especially if they're the only one. And so this whole idea of tokenism, it might be serving, like I said before, your diversity metric, but it actually then becomes harmful, and it becomes a burden to the people who have to live in these spaces alone. And I think since the murder of George Floyd by the government, I think all of this has sparked this outrage amongst minoritized communities, not just in the United States, but globally, to say, like, we're not willing anymore to assimilate to these situations where we're being oppressed and excluded and made to change who we are as human beings. And so I think that we're actually entering into a new phase where people who have diverse backgrounds, who have diverse points of views, people who have diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, they're not going to be willing anymore to be the token. And so I think if companies don't figure out how to drive inclusion and to drive belonging, to remove systemic racism and oppression from their HR policies and practices, from their hiring practices, from their pay and promotion practices, they're going to start running out of workforce, because companies like mine are going to be focused on this, so much so that we're going to become a magnet and a beacon for diverse talent, because they're safe at our company, because they can grow at our company, because they can thrive at our company. And it's more than writing a statement. So right now across the United States, companies have spent a lot of time and money with their marketing department, with social media, to put out, like, a Black Lives Matter statement, or stop Asian hate statement, or to change their logo to a rainbow color flag. And we all know that it's bullshit. Like, it is just something that they're doing right now to feel like, they're doing something publicly to say, like, to offer solidarity to people who are actually legitimately being traumatized and harmed in our society. And what these companies really need to be doing is looking at themselves and going like, what are we doing internally to perpetuate, the power in our company sitting with the same group of people, the money in our company sitting with the same group of people, the promotion rate in our company, favoring the same group of people. And so I think if companies would just spend a moment to really just reflect and be willing to make bold moves to throw out their processes, even if they don't know what to do instead, but to really take a bold move to make equality and to bring a little bit of social justice into corporate America, it is going to be good for them. It will actually lead to higher profits. It'll lead to, more innovation. It'll lead to more creativity. All of the economic studies have proven that, right? Like there's a whole S&P index fund that is based around diverse companies, and it outperforms all the other companies. So if you can actually build safe spaces where everybody can contribute and where they can innovate, you're going to lead to better business. So stop being so afraid of it. And HR people are the main blocker. They're the main resistance. They're the main area that kind of keeps us tied to our old ways. And what's changing now, like it kind of started with Me Too, although I feel like Me Too started to fizzle out too fast. But I do feel like we're having kind of a renaissance of what is the point of this function. And I think there's a new wave of people. I like to include myself in it, um, but there are other HR leaders who are out there and who are really trying to say like, "Hey, our number one job is the health and well-being of our employees. It's about helping them achieve the brighter future that they want to achieve because we know that's good for the business. But our first concern is the people." And I think that's why, for me, the title, like Chief People Officer, Chief People Guru at a Cloud Guru, I think it really matters. I think it's a signal to the people, it's a signal to the company that, we really are here for the people. And yes, we are also business people. And yes, we care about keeping, the business surviving because if the business isn't here, then we can't pay the people and we can't make great work environments and we can't, help them to achieve the brighter future that they want. But for me, and I think for this next wave of HR folks, it is about throwing out the term HR. It's about recognizing that humans aren't resources and that if people aren't at the heart of what you do, then you're doing it wrong and you're not going to be able to meet the expectations that are evolving from the available workforce.
Lorraine, another thing I was wondering about is where do you think that tokenism ends and representation begins? Because it's a fine line, yeah, and I can understand that organizations, they have to start somewhere or feel that they have to start somewhere.
I was on this breakfast panel the other day where there was an elected official, and she was talking about how important it is for women to run for political office. And one of the men in the audience asked, "Well, how can we be allies? Like, how can we support it? How can we really be allies for women?" And she said, "Step back." She said, if you're thinking about running for some office, don't, and find a woman who is, someone that you can support and someone that you can throw your weight behind and go help her get elected. And I do think you're right. There has to always be the first one in the room. Um, there has to be the first one in the room. And when I think about the opportunities that I've had in my position, um, I think I have had opportunities to bring up other people, to help them also come into the room. And so I think there's a piece of making sure that that first person that you put in the room also has the space and that they're empowered and that they're able to bring other people with them, but also that they're committed to bringing other people with them because sometimes that's not always the case. And so I think it is a matter of making sure that the people who get opportunities, and as you're really trying to make a step towards diversity, that it is important to them and that they see themselves as people who have that kind of a mission. I think that's important. It really matters to make sure that you're putting people in places that want to bring others with them. They have to be the ones who are kind of pulling it. And I've always said, if you want more women in the workforce, or you want more people of color, you want more queer people in the workforce, just put them in positions of power and they will bring folks with them. At a Cloud Guru, we're doing this really big audit to really make sure that we're drinking our own champagne when it comes to inclusion and belonging, and to make sure that all of our metrics reflect these ideals and these this philosophy that we're talking about this morning. And I was so excited when I started to pull, like, what is the mix of diversity at the different levels of leadership in our company? And it is actually really great numbers. We outperform tech. We're almost 50-50 at every single level in our organization, including the executive suite. And the reason we're there is because our CEOs felt like it was important. Like, our CEO is a Australian guy. He's, in his 30s. He's a white software developer. Like, he's the most typical tech person that you would ever imagine. Like, and he and his brother started this company. But when you look at the executive team that they built, the fact that there's so many women on it, there's people of color, then you start to look at the impact that we have as we're hiring.
So yeah, Lorraine, I think we are getting towards the end of our conversation today. I do have one last thing though that I would really like to ask you about. I was wondering if you have perhaps a challenge that you would like to if you have a challenge that you would like to leave our viewers and our listeners with, something to implement in their everyday life.
Yeah, another thing that's happening during COVID is people are suffering in the mental health side of their life. I think people are lonely, people are really longing for a connection, and they're getting tired, right? Like, it's just the pressure of being stuck in your house, of having lockdowns and then opening things back up and then getting locked down again. And it's just this volatility that's happening in our actual life. Forget about work, right? Like, so forget about work and just think about the human experience right now. You might get sick, your partner might get sick, you have all of this pressure, and on top of it, you're just completely lonely, and you're expected to produce the same amount of work. You're expected to, have the same outcomes. It's completely unreasonable. So when you think about mental health right now, the best thing that you can do as people and culture professionals, the best thing that you can do as a leader, and the best thing that you can do as a human being, a neighbor, or a friend, or a daughter, or a son, is to, like, actually connect to someone. And I think if you take a moment every day to not just say, like, hi, how are you, to some other human being, but you actually say, like, what are you afraid of? Or what are you excited by? And actually ask a bigger question that's deeper, that's more personal, that's more vulnerable. And, answer it first. Like, tell people what's going on with you. That will help you from a mental health perspective, but it'll also help someone else. And I think that we're not paying enough attention to the isolation and the loneliness that's happening around us right now.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So the challenge in a nutshell is try to really connect to someone else, to another person. So Lorraine, this has been such an interesting conversation. I really loved the things that we touched on. I think we could have gone easily for another hour. I mean, you have so many great stories and examples that you shared. Also, I think a Cloud Guru sounds like a one-of-a-kind company to work for. So I'm really glad that we got to have this conversation together, and that you were our first guest on AIHR Asks. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.